Hey everybody, Lee Troop here, coach of Team Boulder and coach of Jake Riley. It's been 7 weeks since Jake ran at the Olympics in Sapporo, Japan, and thought we'd do a bit of a catch up to see where he's at, what's going on, and what the plans are going to be moving forward. So, Jake, it's been 7 weeks since the Olympics in Japan. What have you been doing?
Took a lot of time off. So I came back from Tokyo, and I think within 12 hours I was back at the airport, went down to Honduras to hang out on an island with my parents and my girlfriend for like 10 days and not think about running, not talk about running, not look at Instagram of running, just put my head in the sand a little bit and drink fruity drinks in the sand. Came back, got back into some easy running a little slowly. Ripped off the Band-Aid last week at Cow Harbor 10K out in Long Island. Got my ass kicked.
Good.
Yep, I really got spanked. A lot of people got some Olympian scalps, which is never fun. To to come in with that reputation, then get absolutely demolished. But congrats to the guys that ran well. So just been getting back into the swing of things. You talked before I left that there was a good chance that I was gonna have a little bit of a dip post-Olympics, and you were right. I had a little bit of a dip post-Olympics.
Well, before we get into the dip post-Olympics, we talked within 12 hours of your marathon, and you gave your assessment of how you felt it went, your lead-in, how you executed the race. Now that we're 7 weeks on and you would have had the race play through your mind time and time and time again, where do you sit with your race? How do you critique it now that might be differently after the heat of the battle 7 weeks ago?
Afterwards, I felt not positive, but I felt okay with it. And I've certainly reevaluated that a little bit. I think I made some pretty glaring tactical errors. I went in wanting to be conservative. And, I didn't want to be one of those guys that blasts out a 4:30 first mile of marathon and then, is falling backwards at 13 miles or whatever it is. But in my effort to try and do that, I essentially let that first pack go where everybody was, but then immediately started trying to reel them in. And when I was trying to reel them in, I didn't have any, or I then tried to do all the work of reeling them in on my own. So I made a tactical error right off the gun, as we've talked about since then. Should have gone out hard and adjusted back as opposed to gone out conservative and tried to adjust up. I think that's kind of the biggest takeaway from this is go out hard and adjust back. I think it makes it a lot easier to kind of fall off a pace than to try and catch back up to it. And that's no better exemplified than me essentially doing 30K worth of work pretty much solo, pulling a train of guys along behind me, trying to slowly reel back in the pack. And then by the time it's really time to go and start working, I had nothing left and I bonked. So, two pretty big tactical errors. I felt good while I was trying to reel people in, but you just can't work solo for 30K in those kind of conditions and expect anything special to happen. And, there was a guy that had tucked in behind me, and I think he ended up finishing 12th. So it was possible to do what I did and still have a solid day. I just didn't try to change leads they won. I just kind of assumed that I was running solo and that I didn't have any help. There were other guys there that I could have traded off leads with, and I didn't, which I think is a pretty rookie mistake. So long story short, I really want another crack at it because I think it taught me a lot of stuff. It's just kind of frustrating that I had to learn those lessons at my Olympics. And so I'm leaving a little frustrated.
Another thing we talked about, and obviously this is a little bit of a taboo topic that we don't delve in a little bit, but we talked a little bit about your nutrition and you leading into it, and you got a little conscientious in regards to weight and wanting to make sure that you could be really lean. Are you open to talking a little bit about your mindset prior to the Olympics going into with what you thought would be advantageous to you in regards to that?
Yeah, I tried to get lean, basically. I compete. Most of the time, I'm probably 10 to 15 pounds heavier than most of the guys I compete against. And sometimes it's an issue, sometimes it's not. But I don't know. I haven't found a direct correlation with my performance, but I leaned out a little bit going into the trials, so I thought if that was good, doing that a little bit more would be better. And so, yeah, I kind of went off on my own and tried to lean out, and I don't think I did that in the most um, intellectual way. Like I didn't do it with anybody else's sort of guidance. I kind of just went off half cocked and did it. And yeah, that is probably, it has the potential to be one of many factors that contributed to me kind of breaking down a little bit towards the end of the race.
But you were ripped.
Yeah, I looked freaking cut.
And those that run marathons, and particularly when we go into hot weather marathons, hot and humid, mistake that I made in the past is that I always went in underweight. And, when your body is obviously giving so much, it just needs that little bit of fat, that little bit of extra weight to be able to burn that energy. Otherwise, it's just muscle. And when there's nothing there, the muscle starts to wilter away and eat away. And all of a sudden you don't have the energy to be able to continue on in the latter parts of the race. So this was something that Jake and I discussed after the race because I wasn't aware of it leading into it. And I think it's a topic that, athletes should be open about with their coaches and with their support team to make sure that when you race, everything is dialed in, your nutrition is dialed in, and everyone is over the top of knowing exactly where you need to be. And that's no different than when you do your weight work, when you're doing your rehabilitation, when you're doing your training, everything needs to be managed correctly. And I appreciate Jake, being open to that, because that was a conversation when we got off the camera that we had to delve into a little bit as to why Jake felt that he had to cut all that weight for the Olympics. And, it's the Olympic Games, right? It's the biggest sporting event in the world. So you're always looking at all these things, these 1%ers that you can do to perform better. And I was no different myself. Like I lived like a monk, everything leading into the Olympics was completely regimented. My diet, my training, I slept in an altitude tent. I did some crazy, wacky things back in the day because I coached myself. But this was a learning experience for both Jake and I to be 100% open and honest with everything. So I think that were the two factors that when we look at his performance was diet and then also the way he executed the start of the race, because the first pack went, the second pack went, and he decided he'd be a little bit more conservative than he needed to be and reel everyone in. And as he said, he was reeling people in, and as he went past people, people would jump on him, and he felt amazing through 30K, and then between 30 and 35, it started to get hard, and then at 35K, he bonked. He had no extra reserves in his nutrition and weight, and also he'd run 35K on his own. So valuable lessons for young athletes that are going to be coming through and aspire to compete at this level. The other thing that I wanted to talk about...
Before we get onto that, I will say, I don't know that it's necessarily wrong to look at what you're eating or how much or any of that kind of thing. I think the biggest mistake that I made was not making sure that everyone in my support team, the people that I work with, so that's you primarily, but also the docs that I work with, the physical therapist, my strength coach, that everybody was looped in. I was trying to coach myself, and I think one of the issues with wanting to be as good as I can be and leave no stone unturned is that sometimes when I get in my own head, I don't want to risk doing too little, so then I go for too much. And that's where I think, especially at this level, having a coach to kind of pull you back in and talk me specifically, but I think other athletes that want as badly to be good as I do, talk us off the ledge of thinking I need to do these 10 different things when not all of them are going to necessarily matter, or, kind of sorting out the priorities, because it's hard for me to have the correct perspective. And so I think the biggest thing was that I wasn't being kind of open and having a plan together with everybody that's contributing and sort of having an effect on how I'm going to feel on race day, but also, pulling back a little bit and not being as committed to it. But anyway, continue.
And just as a disclaimer, when we're talking about this, I don't want people to think that Jake wasn't eating and that he was doing anything along the lines that, we see with people with not eating and then obviously, trimming down. Jake felt that he overeats, and he decided that he wanted to count all his calories and monitor his calories, and had a set goal of what his daily caloric intake should be. As a marathoner, I don't think you can get enough calories in, and that you should be getting as much calories as possible, particularly with, the 120, 130 mile weeks, but then also having to run 26 miles, out there in those oppressive conditions. So that's the piece that was missing in regards to, I would have wanted Jake not to focus so much on caloric intake, making sure that he's eating things of complete substance that his body is going to require and need, and not be so focused on weight and calorie. But again, this was a conversation we had post-race that he was open about, which I think is pretty cool. And he's been open about it now, which this is the reason why we're doing this, is to just show transparency. Like, it's great to have victories and talk about the victories, but I think so many athletes, don't perform well, and there's vulnerability. And it's always good to find out what those vulnerable pieces are, so that if you can learn from it and realize that, hey, if I'm going to be training for a marathon and I'm going to be racing in hot and humid conditions, I need to be focused on what my diet is, but in a really balanced way with the right people that are going to give you the right advice, rather than going solo and trying to work it out yourself. So there's a ripple effect, and there's ramifications for that, which we saw. The other topic that I wanted to talk about with Jake, which was, there's a number of topics. I want to talk about what he's done since the Olympic Games. I wanted to talk about a couple of the things that he's learnt from the Olympic Games. I want to talk about what the future holds as we move on. But the topic prior to that I want to talk about is Jake's mental mindset after the Olympics. I know myself, and I know hundreds of other athletes have gone off to the Olympic Games, and they come home from the Olympic Games, and then all of a sudden they go through what I call, which is the post-Olympic blues, which is basically mild depression. For some people, it's major depression. You've spent your whole lifetime training for this big moment, and within 2 hours it's done. And you sort of look around thinking, is that it? Is that what it's all about? And then you come home and, you've got to integrate yourself back into having come from the Olympics and normality. And Jake went through a little bit of that himself. I reached out to him, and, there was just a period of, once he got back from Honduras, he just wanted to have another week or two by himself, which was just at home and doing his own thing. And I asked him if he'd be open to talking about what he went through and how he dealt with it. And I guess I'll leave that platform now for you to talk a little bit about it and how you went through it. And obviously it's a new feeling, it's a different feeling, but how you sort of have overcome it and now back in the game again.
Yeah, well, I think the big thing is it's a year and a half of, well, I guess it was a year, because we didn't know the Olympics were canceled until June or whatever, or postponed. But, I had August 9th circled on my calendar for like a year. And so in terms of planning my future, there's this big delineating line. Like, there's my pre-Olympic life, and then there's going to be some post-Olympic life, and I can figure out post-Olympic life when we get past the Olympics. And everything's building up to this moment, and then we get to the moment, and we went in, and I knew that, first of all, a medal would be kind of pie in the sky. Now, we did see Molly get that medal, and I was, so the day before I was freaking amped out of my mind, like, oh crap, like, Molly, this is her, third marathon ever, like, maybe there's an even better chance. But, when you picture going to the Olympics, you don't picture coming in 29th, you picture, getting a medal, running really, really, really well. And so that's kind of what had been going through my mind. And I thought, well, even if I don't get a medal, which would be really high, like, I think top 10, if I have a great day, I could do that. If I'm 10 to 20th, that would be like a solid performance for me. And so I was kind of going through all those scenarios in my head, and we talked about, we have kind of our A race, our B race, whatever. And then I went out and I got 29th, and it's not like I didn't give everything I had, because I finished that race with absolutely nothing left. But, I thought I was going to have more of an impact on the race than I did. I went there and I kind of didn't show up for, I wasn't really a part of the race from sort of beginning to end. I was just kind of a guy in like the background of a lot of the shots, and I sort of was just another body in the crowd, and that was not how I spent all this time building up my mind, and then I went out, I didn't have the race I wanted to have, and then I got post-Olympics, and it's all of a suddenly, crap, well, what do I do now? And so when I got home, I just, I spent so much time focused so much on this one race and this one time. Just didn't want to think about running. Didn't want to have running shoes around me. Didn't want to have running shorts. Like, I essentially wanted to like watch Netflix and sit on the beach and go scuba diving and snorkeling and like anything to distract me from thinking about getting back into running. I had no interest in planning races or anything like that. And then we got back and yeah, it was nice to be back home in Boulder. But the thought of going out for, another 50 minutes on Bobolink when I spent, a whole year doing that, thinking about the Olympics, and now what do I think about? I have to like reset my goals and everything and get amped for that. And I don't want to start goal setting. I don't want to start timeline thinking and mileage building and all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't know. I can't really explain why. I mean, it's a huge build of my mind, and then I felt like a little bit of a letdown and sort of a loss of energy and a deflating of the balloon. The thing I keep saying is like a wet raspberry, and I don't know that really makes that's in my head. I wanted like a trumpet sound, and it came out as a wet raspberry. Is how the analogy I've been drawing in my head, and that's been a little bit disappointing. But Cow Harbor got back into like racing. I have to be around other athletes again and sort of like get a little bit of pre-race jitters. And so this fall we're planning some kind of shorter road races. It's not going to be this big long build up for anything. It's going to be, get the training in, then juice some short hard efforts, come back, take a little time for training, short hard effort, and just kind of knock some out and get me back into race mode. And I'm excited to do something with a little bit different speed.
And once you sort of got back home and you sort of locked yourself in the house for a couple of weeks and, playing your video games and stuff like that, how, like, obviously you've got to eventually run into people anyway, right? And people are going to talk to you about the Olympics and the Olympics experience. How hard is it to, like, talk about it, because you've come back, you've got this negative aspect about it because it's all come and gone and you're going through your head. And as you said, you felt like you're a number and, you've gone through the motions. How hard has it been to sort of start the conversation off being really positive about it? I mean, like, because you sort of have to, right? When someone talks to you in the street, you have to be positive about it, but deep down you're not. So how have you been able to weather that storm to then finally get to a point where you're comfortable with it?
Yeah, I don't know that I really, well, the main thing I can say is that I'm an Olympian now. And at the end of the day, can't take that away from me. It's been a goal I've had since, I was 6 years old or whatever it is, be an Olympian. So that's, I guess, where I start out the conversation. I can always say, yeah, I achieved a dream, and that's fantastic. I'm the kind of person that I tend to downplay pretty much every experience that I have. So if it was fantastic, I'll say that it was good. If it was good, I'll say that it was okay. If it was okay, I'll say that it was eh. So, I think my Olympic experience was fine. And so I'll kind of pull it back a little bit and say it's okay. And I know that's not what people want to hear, but people have been insanely supportive and congratulatory, and I shouldn't have expected anything else. But, it doesn't seem like anybody I talk to cares what I got. That just that I made it is an achievement, and I'm trying to internalize that kind of thing.
Well, it's your thoughts versus them, right? Like, most people are always going to be extremely grateful, extremely joyous, but it's how we internalize it, right? Because at the end of the day, we are our harshest critics when it comes to everything that we do. And if we can't embrace it and support it and be joyous with it, it's then really hard to then, like, pass that on, right? And so I guess for you, even though you've put on that persona, how have you got to the point now? And yeah, you can say, yeah, look, I'm an Olympian, but you still have to really believe it and be comfortable in the conversation. So how did you get to that point where now you're good, it's done, we're closing the chapter and we're moving on to a new chapter?
I don't think I have yet.
Yeah.
I think I need to get some races under my belt, and I think I need to get fit again. I've been out of shape, and running has not felt particularly great recently. So I think once I get back into racing and I can kind of refocus and get excited about a new goal, I can start to. I think I just need a little bit of space from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the important part, right? Is that you might see someone walk down the street, they've come back from the Olympics and they talk to you and they're being really great. They're putting on some of the times a persona to actually just tell you what you want to hear and make you feel good, when deep down they're still not. And, I always hate talking about my experiences, but the one experience that I've been open to talking about in recent years was my Sydney 2000 Olympic performance. And it was a home Olympics. Went in as, a hometown guy and someone that, had thought that he could finish in the top 10. And Robert Di Castella, had been fifth. Steve Moneghetti had been fifth. And I was really amped to be able to emulate what they've done. And at halfway, I was fourth and running the race of my life. There was only 11 people. And at 23 kilometers, I tore a stomach muscle. And at the time, I didn't know it was a stomach muscle until weeks later when, the MRI showed that. And I started going backwards. And I keep talking about it's the tale of two stories. The first half, I was a rock star. People were 10 deep screaming out, Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. And then I started going backwards. We went over the Glebe Island Bridge and all of a sudden I couldn't breathe. And I thought it was just a stitch. It wouldn't go away. And then at 35K, some guy, or 32 kilometers, a guy jumped out in front of me and had a can of beer and a prawn, as we would say in Australia, but you guys call it a shrimp, which is what Australia had been built up on, the country of prawns and beer, and jumped out in front of me. And I've never felt like a loser in my life, right? That I was so far back that this guy then jumped out just thinking I was making up the numbers. And I crossed the line. I'd also vomited in the blood in the race. I didn't even know what was wrong, but I crossed the line. I tried to get the hell out of there. I won't go in the rest of the stories, but I wanted to hide for as long as I could. And a couple of weeks later, some friends of mine finally convinced me to go out. And I went out and I was at a nightclub with just 4 or 5 friends and had a guy come up to me and was talking to me. And then midway through the conversation, he says to me, "How does it feel to let your country down?" And that has stayed with me for 20 years, almost, or 21 years since the Olympics. And I wanted to hide, right? And so here I was in public, putting on the persona, talking about the Olympics and trying to tell people what they wanted to hear, when deep down I was still trying to internalize the disappointment of being in the lead pack of the race and then failing all the way back to 66. And I felt like a loser for an unbelievably long time. And it's those little things that are life-changing as you move on. It certainly changed the way that I approached the Athens Olympics and the Beijing Olympics, because I always had this voice in the back of my head proving other people wrong, rather than just enjoying my sport and living up to my own level of expectation, which I failed in. So, one of the bits that Jake had when he was here was just struggling with his own performance and where he felt comfortable with. And as he said, he's still not there yet, and it'll still take a bit of time, and he'll rip the Band-Aid off and jump in some more races. But, it might be 6 months before he actually gets to a point of being comfortable with it. And let me tell you, people, it's taken me 19 years. It's been the last couple of years of like counseling and therapy before I've got to the point where I've been able to let it go. And I don't know why it ate away at me, but as athletes, we live by the sword, die by the sword. And it's all those little things that we put into our running. And then when that doesn't happen, we magnify it 10 times greater than what it was. And that's why people end up going through, the mental anguish and the depression and the anxiety that they go through. And so even though you see them down the street and they talk to you, don't ever for a minute think that that is potentially how they really are. There might be something much deeper that they're still trying to deal with. So I appreciate Jake being open about it and talking about it, because it was a big thing for me when he told me, because it just reminded me of some of my own trauma that I went through. So we all go through it regardless of performance, which again, as I said, I appreciate Jake being open about it, because I wasn't 21 years ago, because you weren't allowed to. Now that we've got through that, you've done Cow Harbour, where are we at with mapping out long-term goals and short-term goals with your running?
Well, I don't know how much we're supposed to say, but essentially my big goals are cross-country, if we ever get another cross-country meet to ever happen again, but I still want to make a world cross-country team, and then I just want to crush marathon majors. I mean, it's a bit lofty goal, but I would like to run every marathon major. Don't know if that's going to happen, but I certainly want to just go out and I don't think I've run a race. I think I have a lot more in the tank as far as getting fast times. So I certainly want to go out and run a fast marathon, and then just go out and prove it on the marathon circuit. I think that's the big thing. I mean, you go into what we're allowed to share. I don't know.
Well, I mean, 2024 Olympics. I mean, that's got to be on the cards, right?
Oh, I thought that was a given. Yes,
Yeah,
2024 Olympics.
And then what about world champs? I mean, we've got Oregon next year. We've got Budapest in 2023. I mean, they'd obviously be races that you'd want to run. And you've mentioned the majors. I mean, Charlene Flanagan's doing 6 of them in like a couple of weeks. So, I mean, I don't
Can't be that hard.
Yeah, it can't be that hard. So I don't think you're going to emulate that. But then cross country. So short term, get back into some cross country racing. Club cross at the end of the year. Team Boulder. Get us on the podium. Yep.
If there's any way to have fun running, it's with a team.
Yep.
Someone out there that's debating it, you guys should go to Club Cross. It's fun.
Yeah. So back to basics, back to the things that you love of cross country running and training, and then set yourself up next year to get back into some marathons with the end goal being the Olympic Games in 2024.
Yep. Just as many shots at the world stage as I can get. I think if I get a little bit more experience, come back to the Olympics, older, wiser, more seasoned veteran, not make the same mistakes, and hopefully come back and get a little personal redemption.
Perfect. And I guess this is a great one. We've only been going 26 minutes. When we were in Sapporo, we went for an hour, so we must have been dribbling a lot. And we've done it with another beer in hand, so we're always making sure that this is fun and relaxed. Avery got the Pacer IPA there.
20 of that was you, but
20 of that. Yeah. Well, true. We both like to talk. So look, again, just wanted to touch on where Jake's been for the last 7 weeks. He'll be back racing towards the end of the year, November, December, maybe the 5K at New York, and then definitely Club Cross in December. But more importantly, getting himself ready for 2022 and leading into 2024. So, mate, thanks for your time. I mean, he doesn't have to do it. I coach him, but he doesn't have to go ahead and do these things. But I do appreciate his honesty and transparency. So, my man, thank you. Till next time, everyone. Have fun.